In this exercise, we want to calculate the grade of a student. So here are the marks of a student in different subjects. We pass this array to this function, calculate grade. What this function does is, first it calculates the average grade. So what is the average here? 80 plus 80 plus 50, that comes to 210 divided by 3, so the average is 70. Now here we need a table to see what grade this average corresponds to. So if the average comes down to this range 1 to 59, the grade should be F. If it is between 60 and 69, that should be D. If it's between 70 and 79, that should be a C. If it's between 80 and 89, that should be a B. And finally, if it's between 90 and 100, that should be an A. So spend 5 to 10 minutes on this exercise. When you're done, come back, continue watching. All right, here first we need to calculate the average mark. So to calculate the average, first we need to declare a variable like sum, initialize it to 0. Then we need to use the for of loop to iterate this array of marks and calculate the sum of all these marks. So for let mark of marks, we get mark and add it to sum. So sum plus equals mark. So this is the total. Now to get the average, we need to divide sum by the number of marks, that is marks.length. Now we have the average. We need to use this table to map it to a grade. So one way to calculate the grade is like this. So if average is greater than or equal to 0, actually here the range should be 0 to 59. So if average is greater than or equal to 0 and average is less than or equal to 59, we're going to return F. And similarly, we can have a few other if statements for other grades, but this code is a little bit ugly. There is so much noise in this code. Instead of having two conditions along with the logical AND, we can simplify this expression to something like this. If average is less than 60, because the range for F is 0 to 59. So as long as average is less than 60, we get the same result. See what I did here? So there are different solutions to solve a programming problem, and you should aim for the simplest solution, because as Leonardo da Vinci says, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So using this pattern, I'm going to calculate the other grades. So if average is less than 70, return D. Because if we get to this point, that means average is at least 60 or higher. Now I'm just checking the upper limit. So the upper limit should be 69. So if the average is between 60 and 69, we return D. Similarly, if the average is less than 80, we'll return C. If average is less than 90, we'll return B. And if we get to this point, that means the average is at least 90 or greater. We don't really need another if statement here. We can simply return A. Now we can make this code even better. While this function is fairly simple, it's only about, I don't know, maybe 10 lines of code. We can break this function into two smaller functions, each focusing on one thing. That is what we call single responsibility principle. I use a metaphor. Think of a restaurant. People working in a restaurant have different roles. So the chef is in the kitchen, responsible for cooking. The chef doesn't come out and take orders. So he or she is responsible only for one thing. The same goes for the manager. The manager is responsible only for one thing, managing the restaurant at a high level. We have the same concept in programming. So we should have functions that are small and are focused only on one thing. In this function, we're basically doing two different things. The first part of this function is all about calculating the average of numbers in an array. And the second part is about mapping that average to a grade. So we can extract these few lines, put them in a separate function like this. So function, calculate average. We give it an array. This array can be anything. It can be an array of marks, or it can be an array of temperatures, anything. We can reuse this function in the future whenever we need to calculate the average of a bunch of numbers. Now, I'm going to get all this code, cut it, put it here. Now here we need to rename a couple of variables. Here we're working with marks, but the parameter of this function is called array. So put the cursor here, press F2, and rename this to array. Also, we need to rename our loop variable from mark to value. So now we have a generic function. It's not tied to marks. It can be reused in different situations. And finally, we can return the average here, or we can make this code even simpler. So instead of storing the average in a variable and then returning it, we can simply return the result of this expression. So return sum divided by array.length. See? And finally, we can reuse this function here. So we declare a constant, average, and set it to calculate average of marks. With this change, now we have two very simple functions. Each function is responsible only for one thing.